As the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, told us on Sunday Agenda yesterday, he's hopeful the worst of the inflation spike may be behind us. New figures on the cost of living will be out on Wednesday, with some hope 2023 could be the year of a return to normal for the nation's economy. Let's get some analysis. Dr. Pradeep Philip is with me. He's the head of Deloitte Access Economics. Pradeep, thanks for your time as always. I've read your analysis that you've done today. You're actually calling for the nation to commit to a new normal in 2023. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely, Kieran. Sometimes we hang on to the past unnecessarily and forget that our job is to create tomorrow. And the return to normal has been something we held on to through last year, and we've been through some tough economic times. And now is the time to build, to invest, to create things that build growth and prosperity in the future. And so that's what we're calling for. We're calling for the time to increase our investment in machinery, plant and equipment, to increase our effort on innovation because consumer preferences are changing. We need to meet the market of tomorrow, and we need to invest in our skills, because if we do these things, we start to arrest what has been a core feature of our economy over the last few years, which is a decline in productivity.
Now, I spoke to the Treasurer yesterday about the prospects for China. The COVID zero policy has had a huge impact, of course, not just on China's growth, but the international economy as well. You've suggested that it will have profound consequences emerging from COVID zero, but they could be profoundly positive, couldn't they, Pradeep, with China roaring back in terms of growth throughout the year? That would be a huge benefit to Australia as well.
Absolutely, Kieran. We see this in the positive. We see the relaxing of the COVID zero policy in China as being good for the global economy and the Australian economy, but probably not necessarily in the short term, but certainly in the medium term. In the short term, we know that it'll cause some disruption in China. Supply chains will remain disrupted as they go through this period of opening up. But ultimately, as you point out, Kieran, this is good for Australia and good for the global economy.
As we await the CPI figures this Wednesday, you warn that the global inflationary environment could be longer than people might hope for because of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. But are there signs that elements of it are softening? I think there was a hope from the federal government, obviously, that the rate rise cycle may have peaked and we might have seen the last of the rate rises. What's your read on it?
Absolutely, Kieran. We think inflation in Australia will have peaked in the December quarter, as we'll find out on Wednesday. And we see signs that inflation is not out of control in Australia and some things that are coming back. And what is it that's pulling it back? Where we're seeing the impact of 8 interest rate rises on the trot, starting to impact on consumer spending. Consumer spending makes up about 60% of our economic growth. And we're seeing that run out of road. We're seeing consumers starting to be hit on 3 fronts. One is inflation has reduced their purchasing power. The second, the reaction to inflation has been higher interest rates, and that's reducing their inflation power, and there's more of that impact to come this year. And the third is that real wages aren't growing anywhere near what they should be. And so if we think about that, this is reducing the purchasing power of consumers. And one of the things that's been talked about, Kieran, is that this year we see a large number of fixed mortgage interest rates coming off. So back in 2021, there was some 3.3 million mortgages written. About 35% of those, about 1.1 million of those were fixed. And of that, about 700,000 of them are coming off the fixed mortgage rates, which were around 2% or lower. Now they're faced with 5.6% or higher. And the Reserve Bank tells us that of that 700,000, about 60% of them will face an increase in their mortgage repayment of between 40 and 60%. Now, that's a big impost on what consumers can go out and spend, which means the economy will slow even more, which is why we think the Reserve Bank should not be increasing interest rates any further because we think that increases the risk of recession.
And Pradeep, at the start of this year, just to wrap up, what's your sense? Is there optimism there? I know the IMF warned that a big chunk of the global economy will be in recession. Can Australia avoid that?
Look, we think Australia can avoid it, but it's a fine balancing act. And the key for us is, while the rest of the world is gloomy, let's do the things that we can do, that we can control. And that is, how do we get the right policy settings to facilitate more investment, more innovation, more investment in skills so that we can lift productivity in Australia? So we see a really positive outlook over the medium term. We think the economy will slow this year compared to last year, but this is the time to double down and invest in the things that are going to take us to growth. For example, the decarbonisation agenda. The rest of the world is moving really fast on it. The Inflation Reduction Act in the US is a really big boost for the US. We've got to do our bit now.
Pradeep Philip, Head of Deloitte Access Economics, great to get your insights. Talk to you soon.